Welcome to Château de Purnon, a gem of 18th century French architectural style. The chateau is in Haute-Poitou, just south of the Loire Valley, about 40 minutes drive from the town of Chinon. And when Château de Purnon was constructed, just before the French Revolution, the style of the time was all about symmetry and harmony. And everywhere you look at Purnon, you see symmetry and harmony. You see it in the chateau itself, just behind me, which is surrounded on three sides by a dry moat, and it's in the shape of an H, of the letter H, with a central part and two wings. And you also see it when you look towards the two giant outbuildings, or communs, or dépendance in France. And this one, here on my left-hand side, has a chapel and stables and tack rooms. And here on the right, we have garages and more practical things like a boulangerie and space where seasonal workers would have lived when they came to work here at the chateau. And we see it particularly when we look out in front of me to Purnon's extraordinary Grande Allée. It's 3 kilometres long, which is longer than the Grand Canal at Versailles, and the wonderful 1812 gate that we can look through and admire the forest out in front of us. It's an amazing setting, and it's the home of my fiancée Felicity and I, and as you can see from the scaffolding behind us, it's in the midst of an enormous restoration, the biggest restoration in the chateau's history since it was constructed almost 250 years ago. So come with us now as we enjoy an opportunity to learn a little of Purnon's history and have a look around the chateau. So we'd like to start by introducing you to Antoine Charles Achard de la Haye, the Marquis de la Haye, who constructed Purnon between 1779 and 1788. Let's go up onto Purnon's scaffolding and have a look at his coat of arms and that of his wife. Come along. So we've arrived here at the level of the second floor of the chateau, and we're at the southern side. And here inside this enormous pediment, we can see two coats of arms. Here, the coat of arms of the family of Antoine Charles Achard de la Haye, the Marquis who had constructed Purnon. And here, his wife, Bénigne Modeste de la Motte-Barressé. We can see the rampant lions, as well as the marlets, the birds without beaks, the fleur-de-lis, and even these lines, which would have depicted what colour was on that coat of arms when it wasn't being represented in stone. We see a Marquis's crown on top, and even the weapons of war, which signify Antoine Charles's status as an officer in the French Royal Army. And this is really a remarkable piece of history because it testifies to a dynastic marriage, a marriage between two grand French families, and its placement here on the chateau is a really important piece of the history of Purnon, the people who built it and the people who lived here. While we're up here, let's have a look over Purnon's extraordinary Parc Anglais, or English park. When Purnon was being constructed, styles and tastes were changing, and the traditional French garden, highly ornamental, highly organised, that taste was changing to the more naturalistic, more disorganised setting of the English park. And so Purnon has this amazing English park which stretches out into the horizon behind us with its amazing oak trees. We can see Lebanese cedars, we can see chestnuts, beech trees, an amazing variety that gives this wonderful sense of being surrounded by nature. So as we descend off the scaffolding, let's have a look at some of the other things that the enormous works are starting to uncover for us. So we can see here the work that our stonemasons are doing. If we look over here, for example, with this dormer, we can see a lot of original stone, but also some new stone that's been put in to replace the very damaged stone. And you can see when you look up here just what a terrible state some of the original stone that's now almost 250 years old. What a terrible state it's in. And in fact, Château de Purnon was built from stone that was repurposed from a nearby chateau at Brisay. And so when the tufa stone arrived here, it was already it had already been used for construction for several hundred years. One of the most remarkable things about Château de Purnon is the charpente, or the enormous wooden frame that supports the slate roof. And if we look here, we can see directly just how this charpente was made. And it was made in what they call the style of Philibert Delorme. And Philibert Delorme was a very celebrated French architect from the Renaissance era. And he developed a way of building the wooden frame using small pieces of wood. And at the time that he developed this system, it was revolutionary, because it meant that wooden frames on grand homes and chateaux could be put up much quicker and much more economically. And we can see that style here in Purnon's charpente. Small pieces pegged together by other pieces of wood. And that wooden frame, that charpente, is being restored as part of the current program of works. And if we look over here at the outbuilding at Purnon on the eastern side, we can see the shape of the enormous wooden frame of that building as well, of that building's roof. And it's in the shape of an inverted bateau, or in the shape of an inverted boat. And in fact, they would have used artisans who worked on boats for the French Navy to help build these enormous wooden frames. And they're really works of art. And we're really very lucky to have them in such a highly preserved state here at Purnon, to be able to be admired for future generations. If we stand here and we look up on top of Purnon's central dormer, we can see a metal stake. And on top of that metal stake would have rested the bust of a French king. In fact, the bust of two French kings, one at the front and one at the back. Henri IV, Henri IV, and Louis XV, or Louis XV. When we arrived at Purnon, there was no trace of these royal busts. And then one day, rummaging around in the attic, we found some small pieces from one of the busts. And then in another vaulted cave, or in a tunnel underneath a section of the chateau wall, we found the head of Henri IV, or Henri IV. And our architect helped us piece together the mystery of the royal busts that would have originally sat on the roof of Purnon. He used old postcards to solve the mystery of the two royal busts that used to sit on Purnon's roof. And right now they're in the process of being restored, and so soon, as part of this first program of works, we'll be able to return these royal busts to the place that they belong, on Purnon's roof. And it's really going to be quite spectacular to have these royal busts back in place. So take a look at these corniches, these corner pieces with the crenellations underneath. Each corner piece weighs 850 kilograms, and we needed a crane 60 meters long to be able to put these 4 corniches on this side of the chateau back into place. So our stonemasons crafted these beautiful pieces that fit exactly in the place where they belong, and it was a really important step in that first program of works to be able to get these corner pieces into position to make the chateau look as it would have looked when it was constructed at the end of the 18th century. So part of the wooden frame of Purnon included enormous pieces of wood called sablons, which the frame rested upon. And they were an important part of helping the chateau roof to expand and contract in changing weather conditions. But of course today they're completely rotted. We can see evidence of of woodworm eating out the pieces of wood, so they need to be replaced. And take a look at how degraded they are. This piece of wood that should weigh many kilos is actually quite light because it's been so degraded over time, over the last almost 250 years. And so seeing all these pieces of wood being restored where possible and replaced where necessary is just such an important part of this first program of works. We're coming through the main entrance. This is the entrance that guests and the family would have used in the late 18th, early 19th and 20th centuries. We come here through this grand entrance and up the Grand Escalier, the main staircase. And it's on this grand staircase in the early part of the 20th century, in 1919, when the then Marquis de Rochequerie, who helped restore Purnon, helped restore the Château in the early 20th century, he tragically died here of a heart attack in 1919. But let's go and have a look at the Château's Blue Room, one of our favourite rooms. So we're here in the Château's Blue Room, and we're surrounded by this extraordinary hand-painted wallpaper from the end of the 18th century. And if we look carefully, it's in an arabesque pattern. And this wallpaper, we've had experts in French wallpaper look closely at it, and after careful research, we've learnt that it was constructed, that it was manufactured at the workshops of Révillon in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine in Paris. And these workshops were the scenes of some of the worst, some of the bloodiest riots during the French Revolution. And there's absolutely no doubt, because of the Château's date of construction, finished as it was just the year before the French Revolution broke out, there is no doubt that some of the workers who worked on this extraordinary wallpaper would have witnessed and perhaps participated in the tragic events of the Révillon riots at the outbreak of the French Revolution. This wallpaper is the last surviving example of this particular design anywhere in France. It's extraordinarily precious, and we're very, very lucky to have it. Let's go have a look in the salle à manger, in the Château's grand dining room. So we're here in the Château's dining room, the salle à manger, and the Marquis Achard de la Haye, who had constructed Purnon just before the French Revolution, was an ardent monarchist. And so during the Revolution, he fought on the side of the royalist troops fighting to overturn the French Revolution. His son, Auguste, was killed, massacred during a massacre of royalist troops in Lyon. And he fought in many battles with the army of the Condé and with the army of the princes. And he returned to Purnon at the end of the 19th century, in about 1797, to oversee the construction of the very last stages of the Château and the surrounding buildings. And so for them, it would have been a great joy to see the restoration of the monarchy after the abdication of Napoleon Bonaparte. We were surprised to find this bust of one of France's least popular kings, Louis XVIII, here at the Château. And the question is what is it doing here? Well, obviously, with a family of fervent monarchists, the restoration was a great event. It was something that meant that the old social order that they respected and that meant so much to them was going to be restored and re-established. The Marquis himself, the Marquis Antoine Charles Achard de la Haye, had been a page to the Duc d'Orléans, to one of the brothers of Louis XV. And so for them, the restoration was a very important part of the re-establishment of the social order that they preferred and that was such an essential part of their lives. So let's go and have a look in the Château's basement, in the sous-sol, and we'll have a look at the old kitchen and learn a little bit more of the history of the next phase in Château de Purnon's life. So we're heading down to the basement. And the basement was, of course, a place for domestic staff, for servants. The family would have rarely gone here. And as we descend, we move into a new world, a different world, a world of the workers, the servants, the people who served the grand families who lived in these extraordinary estates. And so this is Purnon's original kitchen. So after the Marquis Antoine Charles Achard de la Haye died in 1816, the chateau passed to his last surviving son, Edouard. And when he passed away in 1844, the chateau passed to his daughter, Catherine, who had married the Baron de Goyon. And if we look here, in the grenier, in the attic of the chateau, we found some of the de Goyon copperware. If we look closely here on this lid, we can see the name de Goyon etched onto the lid of the copperware. So imagine these kitchens in the height of the 19th century. There would have been noise and bustle as the meals were prepared. The Montplaque, which is just one room away from us, or dumb waiter, would have delivered the meals up into a room just next to the salle à manger so they could be served hot to the guests dining in the grand dining room. There would have been movement and noise, activity as food arrived through the dry moat, through the douve sèche, through a different entrance than the entrance that would have been used by the family and their guests and visitors. It would have been a bustling place. It would have been an exciting hub of life here at the chateau for the domestic staff and the servants who looked after the many people who lived here. Now we're going to move to the bibliothèque, or the library, and continue learning about the history of Château de Purnon. So we're here in the chateau's library, or bibliothèque. And in the middle of the 19th century, this would have been the hub of family life here at the chateau. And at that time, Pauline de Goyon married the Comte de Montesquieu-Fezensac. And the Count came from a great French family with a long and distinguished history. His grandfather had fought alongside Napoleon during the retreat from Moscow, and he was gravely wounded at the Battle of Waterloo. And his father, his name is recorded on the Arc de Triomphe, and he'd been a member of the Académie Française. And one of their ancestors, D'Artagnan de Baz de Castlemore, is the figure that Alexandre Dumas based the central character in The Three Musketeers upon. What a great French family. Sadly, during this time, the chateau started to fall into decline. Thankfully, in 1893, the Comte Daniel Jérôme de Rochequerie purchased Purnon. And it was during his time that a great new investment took place to protect and preserve the chateau for future generations. Let's have a look at the results of some of that work. So we're here in the chateau's Grand Salon. This is one of Purnon's grandest rooms. And the style changed completely during the era when the Comte de Rochequerie started the investment to protect Purnon for the future. It would have been originally in a Louis XVI style, but if you look around us now, you can see that it's in a Louis XV or Rocaille or Rococo style. And if we come over here to this grand fireplace, we see this enormous fire back at the back of the fireplace. And just like the blason on the facade of the chateau, the two coats of arms testify to a dynastic marriage. And it's a marriage between the Rochequerie family and the Douaron family. And the Douaron family own a grand chateau just a few minutes' drive north of here at Chateau de Douaron. The Comte de Rochequerie had married Elizabeth de Douaron in 1887, and together they had 4 children. Sadly, she passed away in 1901, and the following year, the Marquis, now he's the Marquis de Rochequerie, married her sister, Yvonne, at the chapel here at Purnon. And that, at the time, that was not an unusual occurrence. And if we look at the back of the fireback, we can see a Marquis's crown over the top of the two family coats of arms. As well as redecorating this room, the Rochequeries made many other changes to Purnon. They built the Éolium Bolet in the Château's potager garden, which pumped water to feed the plants and vegetables and fruit trees growing in the garden, and also pumped water to the Château here. They put the guttering system that we can now see throughout the Château's roof, and they put new heating systems and introduced electricity to the Château. It was a period of great change that restored Purnon and preserved her for future generations. So let's go and have a look at Château de Purnon's chapel, where the Marquis de Rochequerie married Yvonne de Waron. Heading across to have a look at Château de Purnon's chapel, and as always at a chateau, there's an enormous chateau key, and this is the key to Purnon's chapel. This is one of our favourite places. Welcome to the chapel at Château de Purnon. You can see we still have the old confessional box. So if you have any sins you'd like to confess, now is the perfect opportunity. And although Purnon's chapel is really in a terrible state, we can really see, even today, what a beautiful place she must have been during the grand era of the chateau. We can see the niches where two statues would have sat. Saint Blaise here, who is a saint that's revered by farmers and agricultural workers, and Saint Achard over here, who was the patron saint for the family that constructed the chateau. We've protected these two extraordinary statues, and they're protected in another part of the chateau before the restoration of the chapel takes place. We have this amazing Annonciation, the painting of the Archangel Gabriel telling the Virgin Mary that she will be giving birth to Jesus. We have the stained glass windows here, St. Joseph and the Virgin and Child over here, slightly damaged, and the stalls with the balcony above us, where the family would have sat for masses and for religious services. It's really an extraordinary place of private devotion for the family that constructed Château de Purnon. And it was here in 1902 that Daniel Jerome de Rochequerie married Yvonne de Waron. So let's go and have a look at Purnon's amazing stables. So the Marquis de Rochequerie was regarded as a great horseman and a very, very keen hunter. He had the forest in front of him and other forests in the local area where with his friends he could hunt the stag and the roe deer and the other animals. And of course, so much of the hunting in that era was done on horseback, and the horses were cared for here in these stables. The door's a little stiff. We can see the loose boxes here where the horses would have been brushed and fed, and also the other boxes at each end of the stables where the horses would have slept and stayed for longer periods of time. And although they're really in terrible condition today, we can imagine how they must have been during the height of the chateau. And so after the Marquis de Rochequerie passed away in 1919, Purnon saw many decades of great uncertainty, the Great Depression, World War, and a period of neglect until the chateau was purchased in 2020 by Felicity and I. And we've embarked on a program to restore and rebuild many of Purnon's most beautiful features. And you can see the commencement of that work behind us with the scaffolding around the eastern side of the chateau. And that's it, Purnon's history, from its construction on the eve of a revolution that would echo around the world until its restoration in the first decades of the 21st century.